Congressman Josh Gottheimer is co-chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus, but one of the things the bipartisan group has been unable to solve is funding for the Department of Homeland Security, which continues to cause airport delays here in the metropolitan area. Now, we know that there's been a tentative sort of agreement. I say tentative sort of because who knows, and as you know that better than anybody, but it seems like the head of the Senate and the head of the Republicans in the House have decided that there's a tentative agreement that would fund DHS without funding ICE. Is there any hope?
Correct. The deal that actually passed out of the Senate unanimously, and then the House said no thank you, the leadership in the House.
Is there any hope that that no thank you will turn into a thank you?
Yes, it seems like that no thank you will be a thank you, and we've got to get the Department of Homeland Security open fully. It's absurd that it hasn't been, and I think this is a good outcome. You know, I'd still like to see certain reforms of ICE, which I had been working in a bipartisan way on for months to try to get some of the things done that are necessary, judicial warrants before going into a home, IDs, IDs on, yes, and one of the big things was making sure that officers identify themselves and that they have a badge, and then we have more coordination actually with local law enforcement, with ICE. A lot of these reforms, by the way, which the Secretary of Homeland Security has said that he's open to many of the reforms, the new secretary. And I think you're going to see a lot of change in that department and the way things are operating.
But here's the question. If you come up with a deal in the next couple of weeks to fund most of DHS except for ICE, what happens? Do we just let the ICE funding go away so it doesn't become an election issue next November? Or do we find a solution sometime so that some reforms of some kind allow ICE to function?
So I would like to find reforms. That's what many of us have been working on in a bipartisan way, as you mentioned. What looks like will happen right now is that they'll fund Homeland Security, so without ICE, and then the Republicans are planning on putting up a separate bill just to fund ICE. They'll do it through a method called reconciliation, which you may have heard of before, and that ends up often being a partisan vote. So that's their plan. I'd like to see, and I'm worried that reforms won't happen if that's the way they go. So I'm going to keep working with a group of us in the House and the Senate, bipartisan, to try to figure out some of those reforms and to fund Homeland. We've got to make sure our Homeland is protected fully and that our airports are running well, and that, of course, these TSA officers and everybody at Homeland gets paid.
But here's my question. Given the fact that the margins in both the House and Senate are small, and there are Republicans who have voiced opposition to various of the reforms you talk about in terms of ICE, what's the possibility that they won't go along with any reforms?
Well, see, you definitely have a bunch of people who don't want any reforms, but there's enough people, and when you have small margins, as you know, that matters.
So are there Democrats that are going to go along with the bill to give the Republicans enough votes?
If they put reforms in that bill with other things, I definitely think you can get Democrats and Republicans on board with that.
But you're not going to get all the reforms you're asking for.
No, of course not. It's
so
called working.
So in other words, what can you give in on? I guess you don't want to talk about that to negotiate.
I don't negotiate in public, but let me just tell you, there are many reforms that the ones we've been talking, Democrats,
like
Republicans,
masks and identifying yourself.
Masks are harder, although maybe used because if someone's going in, their argument is their officers are getting doxxed and people find them and then they go after them. However, what I think is reasonable is if they should have to use masks only if they need to, right? Not for every instance. Or you also have badges and IDs. You actually have coordination with local law enforcement, which is really important. You're able to investigate when something happens. We saw all the tragedies in Minnesota, and there was fighting back against actually having external FBI investigations and working with the state. That's unacceptable. They shouldn't be able to go into hospitals and polling places and pick people up, which I think is outrageous at a school, kid coming out and they're picking up parents. Those are the kind of things that should be out of bounds. You want to protect our country, protect our borders, make sure everyone is safe, but also live up to our values. And when you go do what happened in Minnesota, that's completely unacceptable and not who we are. And I think there's a difference between the two. And if we come up with an agreement, and by the way, again, there's a lot of people who actually have an idea of what that could look like, and I've been working on this, I'm really hopeful we can move forward.
But yet, even though there are problem solvers in your group, like Congressman Suozzi and Congressman Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, who's a Republican, even though there's been these bipartisan rules,
talks,
nobody has agreed to it yet.
No, but you know, I will tell you that, and this was publicly reported, that many of us have been working together for months, even in the Senate, Republicans. You saw Senator Katie Britt has been working on stuff. Mark Wayne Mullen, before he was Secretary of Homeland Security, I was talking to him. It's been reported we were working together when he was a senator on some reforms and agreements. So I actually am hopeful that we can get there. And I also believe, I really believe that there's going to be changes already being made with Tom Homan at Homeland. And I'm hopeful that they're already shifting their behaviors away from where they were under Secretary Noem, which to me was totally unacceptable. And I believe there's going to be reforms. They should be codified. That's what I'm working on with others and others you mentioned. And I really believe we can get there. People want that. Right? They want us to make sure we protect our borders and keep away people who shouldn't be here and seek to do people harm, and also live up to our values and actually not roam the streets, busting into people's homes and without warrants and just going after people randomly. People don't want that. That's not who we are.
Well, let's talk about the war in Iran. Do people want that, and do you support that?
I think the government of Iran deserves to be crushed, in my opinion. They're an enemy of our country, the leading state sponsor of terror in the world. They've killed scores of Americans, attacked and killed our service members and our bases and our allies. Their banner is death to America. They've developed longer range missiles, as reported. You know, things that I believe I want to protect our country and against terror.
So you support the war?
So I support going after them. I have been what I've said publicly is you actually have to have clear goals. And part of my concern has been is this administration hasn't laid out their objectives of what a win would look like. You know, there's a big difference between weakening their missile program, which I think is critical, and weakening their nuclear program, which is essential so they can't threaten our country and our terror. You get into regime change, which I would love to see, but understand once you start going down the path, right, you got to understand who's going to be next, and that's a longer period of time. And we're already seeing gas up significantly, but the Straits of Hormuz closed, right, which is 20% of the world's oil running through there.
Because they're trying to stop the whole thing. I mean, the reason why they closed it, they're trying to stop the war. And here's the question:
the Iranians, of course,
the Iranians. But here's the issue. So now we have taken out lots of upper echelon leaders, and according, if you listen to the president, and some second-tier leaders. So, but still, the people haven't risen up to try to take control of their government. So, is regime change even in the realm of reality, given what's happening there? That's been going on in that country? I
think regime change is very tough, right? Not impossible, but very tough.
And you're still going to have to deal with the same hardliners that you've had to deal with all along. So what changes?
But you massively, hopefully, we massively set back their programs, right? Their terror program, their ballistic missile program, which, by the way, is
But you don't set back their desire to kill Jews.
Of course not. No, of course not. To kill Americans.
And to kill Israel.
Yes. And by the way, to kill lots of our allies, kill Jews, but lots of our allies, us, right? They're terror proxies through Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. These are people who killed Americans.
All those proxies are trying to kill Israel.
Yeah, of course. They have been for a long time.
So despite the fact that you've taken them out and you've taken out their missiles, it hasn't changed their desire to go after the Israelis and anybody that's associated
not the leadership.
With them.
But I really believe, and this was the point that you were just, I think, touching on, you've got a groundswell of people in the country. After the leadership there, the government just killed 40,000 or more of their own people, massacred them, right, for speaking out and looking for freedom in Iran, speaking up for freedom, right, speaking up for democracy and wanting that. And this is who these people are, the government there. They seek to undermine freedom and democracy and attack our country. So we got to protect our country from them. And whether we and I think to your point, if we set them back massively, that would be seen, in my opinion, as a win. You know, changing the regime would be an ultimate win, but I'm not sure, you know, that's a much more involved process, and that could involve boots on the ground. I don't support boots on the ground.
Okay, and now we're gonna have to leave it right there for now. But our conversation continues right after the show on our streaming channel, CBS News New York. We are back with Congressman Josh Gottheimer, and we were talking about the war in Iran, and it's sort of a natural move to talk about the rise of anti-Semitism here in this country. You know, I was reading a story today about a hockey team in Connecticut, and they were defeated by another team from New Canaan, and they were all disciplined because they spread anti-Semitic hate. They called it Jew Canaan and other things, and they were disciplined for it. But that's in terms of the microcosms of the anti-Semitic incidents that happened. I wonder how you deal with that, and how you deal with the rise of anti-Semitism that has now even spread to a hockey game in Connecticut.
I mean, hate overall has spread like crazy, and anti-Semitism is at the worst levels. ADL's been tracking these for about 50 years, the worst levels in 50 years. I wrote these numbers down. Anti-Semitism up 344% in 5 years, and K-12 up 75% over that period of time. So it's happening, imagine in K-12, right, in schools.
So why is why are so many young people hating? And it's not just Jews. They hate everybody who's different. Yeah, yes. Asians, blacks, anybody.
1,000%. I think there's a couple things going on. One, social media and the disinformation that's pumped out on TikTok.
Also Islamophobia.
Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, hate overall way up. People are in these narrower communities they live online, and they're fed information and disinformation all day long.
Is this social media?
I think it's a huge player here, in social media. And then we're not teaching our kids enough in school, in K-12. I think by the time a kid gets to college, it's too late to try to undo what they've learned or not learned.
Are they learning this at home, and is school not playing enough of a role?
Well, I don't know what people are teaching their kids at home. I would hope that when they see things happening on this hockey team, they go home and they talk about how that's unacceptable. I'd also hope that in the schools, when there's a swastika, which I see all the time, or some anti-Semitic hate, that the schools themselves use it as a teachable moment and not just try to ignore it. And I'll tell you, though, I'm seeing more and more people ignoring it. And when I call it out, my colleagues say to me, enough already. How often are you going to call this stuff out, Josh? And I say, I'm going to keep calling it out, because if we don't, then it becomes acceptable against any community.
Do you think it's been normalized?
I think a lot of it's been normalized. Yeah.
By who?
It happens in culture, mainstream culture. It happens online. And of course, it's happening in politics. You're seeing extremes in both parties saying things which I can't believe. A few years ago, you said to me these comments would be made. I'd say absolutely not, no chance, right? And there's a guy, Hassan Piker, who's a guy in the, who's left-leaning.
He has podcasts.
He's got podcasts, right? He's got a lot of followers who listen to him. You've got people like AOC and Bernie and Ro Khanna and Mandami who've gone on his show, legitimizing him. It's a guy who has said America deserved 9/11. It's not just anti-Semitic, it's anti-American rhetoric. Orthodox Jews are inbred, right? He said the reports of rape after October 7th, he questioned the reports on rape, denied them.
So let's ask this question. How do we as a country deal with that? I know that you have introduced legislation that allow parents to limit the social media that kids can be exposed to. Is that enough to stop the hate that we see around the country?
I think parents have to be in control in deciding what their kids, to make sure they only let their kids be exposed to what they want them to be exposed to. And right now, a lot of kids are being exposed to content they shouldn't be, because it's the Wild West online.
So is
TikTok,
social
by the
media
way,
responsible for the increase in hate incidents?
I think it's part of it. There's so much disinformation there, and they're being fed these lies. I think then, everything else in culture, people being angry at one another. You look on cable news, you look at all the stuff, everything is negative and not enough positive about how great our country is. It's all about negative. And we used to promote and celebrate some of that.
How do you change that?
I really think it starts in our schools.
You're going to have people watch cartoons instead of, come on.
No, realistically, I think it starts with a lot of education. It starts with our leaders actually saying, when Hassan Piker makes those comments, standing up and saying, just the same way they should stand up to Nick Fuentes, Tucker Carlson. It's on both sides, right? But guess what happens? They legitimize it by showing up. And they really should be, which I can't believe. They should say, are you kidding me? You say those comments, I will be nowhere near you. Look at the guy running for Senate in Maine, right? Who has a Nazi tattoo. And people are saying, okay, we should that's acceptable. None of that should be acceptable to me. And if we do that, we would be saying to our children, this is not who we are as a country, instead of legitimizing it.
But here you are, and you are part of the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is trying to bring Republicans and Democrats together to come up with solutions. But some of the things that you propose, all of them, fall on deaf ears because people still want to hate each other in both the House and the Senate. How do you deal with that? Because that sends a message to everybody else in the country.
Sure, both sides don't want to give the other side a win, right? And that's part of the problem. Instead of saying the country gets a win, people look at it as, well, I can't do anything that's going to help the other side. And listen, it doesn't help when you got a president who uses rhetoric that's you'd never expect out of the Oval Office. You know, you've got people on the far left who are using rhetoric that's unacceptable, and you don't have leaders standing up and saying that's not okay because they're worried about criticizing their own people in their party. That's the problem. Here's the good news. There's a bunch of us who are still working together and actually getting a bunch of stuff done. You know, people may not see it because, to your point, what does news like to cover? The fights. It's more fun, right, to cover the hockey fight instead of actually covering the good stuff, people working together. Usually when I talk to a reporter, they'll yawn. What do you mean you got something done working together? That's so nice. And then, you know.
That's such a harsh criticism of what we do.
You don't do that, but come on. Go turn on cable news. Most of it's fighting with each other. They focus on the fight because that sells more, and I get it. But if that's how culture is overall and the algorithms play that role too, you wonder what our kids are seeing.
All right, let me ask you one last question, one last topic. And that is that the president has asked for $1.5 trillion to increase the defense budget, and there would be some cuts to domestic policy programs. How do you feel about that? I know it's a negotiation, but do we need to have that much more money spent on the war machine?
Well, I haven't seen the specifics, so I'm always loath to comment until I see them. Obviously, I'd be really concerned what they want to cut domestically, because he's tried to cut a lot of stuff already and has gone after things to help people, especially when people are facing $4 gas and higher prices. It's not a great time to hurt people who are struggling.
But don't you have to replenish?
But you've got to help. But I'm not going to leave our military, when we're dealing with our number one adversary, China, weakened. We can't leave our service members weakened. We have to be tougher than ever, because we're fighting against a tough adversary. And by the way, that involves AI on the compute side. That involves, of course, weapons. You see the drone programs coming out of Iran, and you see how sophisticated they are, how cheap those drones are to make devastating weapons. So we have a lot of work to do, and we cannot fall behind. We got to be tough as a country.
Well, also, there's the question of how much we've depleted our weapons by the war that we've been waging day after day after day.
A lot of interceptors to go get the missiles coming in, as Iran has beefed up massively their missile program. So yeah, this is but here's the point: we can't afford to not be the best and to be ready to protect our country.
And on that note, thank you for joining me,
Thanks.
Congressman Gottheimer.
Thanks,
thank you for joining us as well.